On today's episode, I have Phil Bradstock joining me from the City of Phoenix Film Commission office. He's actually sharing a little bit more as far as what it takes to shoot your next commercial or your video here in the state of Arizona. Phil, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
You have a very interesting role. Would you mind just sharing a little bit more about what your position actually entails?
Sure. So I'm the film commissioner for the City of Phoenix, and basically what I do is I coordinate all of the shoots that are happening on City of Phoenix property with all the different departments that are out there. So shoots actually cross over into a lot of different departments, unlike maybe a construction that's just dealing with planning, and they have set people dedicated to that. I basically represent every department. So if you need to close down a road, close down a sidewalk, run a red light, fire a gun off or something, or have an Uzi in downtown Phoenix for a shoot, that all goes through my office, and I coordinate it with whatever the relevant department is. So it could be aviation department, it could be parks department, you name it. Pretty much we work with everybody.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it that I'm sure a lot of us don't really know. So that's very interesting that you get to do that on a daily basis. How often are you actually on site working on something?
You know, believe it or not, it's very virtual now. Most of what I do is with email and telephone calls. In fact, my predecessor had this very funny line that I loved when I first started 13 years ago, where she said movies are made with a phone, not with a camera. And that really is true, because when you go to plan these things out, sometimes movies can take years, commercials will take a week. And so a lot of it's just the negotiations and figuring out and all the planning. But when you're actually shooting the project, the actual camera and the lens is only on for a very brief amount of time for the entire project. So most of it's done in advance. The shooting day happens, and then it goes into post-production, and then you're there for a couple of weeks potentially.
Could you share a little bit more about your background and how you actually got into this role?
Yeah, so it's actually interesting. So I have a political science degree from Boston College. Supposed to go to law school. Ended up, like most kids out of college, worked with my father as a general contractor, building buildings, construction, and then traveled around the world for basically almost a year, followed in this summer. Came back home, and luckily my family is in the entertainment business, the other side of my family. And so my cousin knew I was just kind of a 23-year-old kid hanging out at home, bothering his parents, and said, do you want to come to LA and get the writers their lunches on this TV show called Suddenly Susan? And I said, sure, I'm not doing anything, might as well go. You know, I'm not tied to anything at this point in my life. And so I took off and I went to Hollywood, and basically my job was to literally, a writer's PA is to get the writers their lunches. And so I had to get back then, before we had cell phones and everything, because this was in 2000, bought a Thomas Guide, which everybody in LA used to have, and anybody watching this knows what that is. It's from LA. And learned the streets of Los Angeles, all the restaurants, and worked on the Warner Brothers lot. Did that for the last 5 episodes of the show, and then my line producer liked me, and so he took me on to another show he was doing called Nikki. And then I just got in with Warner Brothers and spent 6 years there as a production coordinator on episodic scripted TV shows.
So what brought you back to Arizona then?
You know, I actually met my wife on set of a TV show called Presidio Med, which was a John Wells show back around 2002. He also did ER and West Wing, so he was a really big producer at the time. I'm sure maybe he still is, but he was about these female doctors in San Francisco. They were treating children, and it was very kind of sad, because every episode started out with some kid that had, some 8-year-old that had a headache, and 45 minutes later, by the end of the show, they were dead from brain cancer. So It got really kind of ridiculous after a while. So that show got canceled. No surprise. But I actually met my wife on that show. She was a production assistant in the office. And once that show canceled and we started dating, and she was doing her thing on 1 hours and I did the multi-camera sitcoms, we realized we were going to get married. Didn't really want to raise a family in La La Land, and so we moved back here where I'm from, which is Phoenix. She's from Central Illinois and doesn't like the weather and is more than happy to be out here in the heat. And
a lot of us say that.
Yeah. And so just moved back out here and got a little place, and started working on a TV show called out here. It was a MTV show called Room Raiders. I don't know if you remember that one at all.
I do remember that.
But they'd have like the girl, and then she'd go into the 3 guys' room. So anyways, I did that for a couple of months while interviewing for the City of Phoenix Film Commissioner position, because my predecessor had started, I believe, in 1978 and retired in 2005. And so I just happened to land in Phoenix in 2006 right at the perfect timing, and ended up getting the job and been doing it for 13 years now.
So as you're working with all these different, talented artists, I mean, how often are companies or individuals coming in from out of state looking to film stuff?
The vast majority.
Really?
Yeah, the vast majority are out of states. They hire local, but it's not. A lot of the A lot of the projects that we get, like maybe it could be a local advertising agency, but a lot of local advertising agencies are part of national chains, if you will, and so they have a local office here. So it goes out to bid to a production company, and then the production company will bid on it. They could be in Maine, they could be in Washington, wherever. But then they come down here to actually film their projects. So it's not too frequent. I mean, it's probably about a third of the time it's locals. Pretty much everything else, a lot of my insurance certificates that come in are out of New York or out of Los Angeles or out of Texas or somewhere else.
Wow, I had no idea.
Yeah.
And can you maybe share a little bit more about the size of the projects? How big and how small projects do you work on?
Everything. So because I'm a one-person office, fifth largest city in America, one-person office, even Tucson, love Tucson, my counterparts down there, they have 2 people for Tucson. So I'm just by myself. So I deal with everything from student projects. It could be a Scottsdale Community College type project, which they have a very good film school, as well as ASU and GCU, all the way up to the major motion pictures. So it really just depends. It's a full gamut of things. Primarily what we see the most of, if you want to talk about types of projects, it would definitely be what I call reality TV specials, which is when you have a show that comes into Phoenix to shoot just for a day as part of their project. So, for example, when The Biggest Loser was on TV, a lot of times the contestants, for whatever reason, would be here from the Phoenix metro area. And so they would always do the going home type things. And so then I'd have to help coordinate their shoots. So we get a lot of those type of things. Like I just did the other day was the NFL Films for Hard Knocks with the Raiders, them flying in to Phoenix, filming on the tarmac, so I had to coordinate that with the aviation department. So that's what I call reality TV specials. But the big money that we see coming in here, and the most projects is, well, not the most, but the bigger ones is commercials. And so commercials are fairly sizable. You can have 50 people out there doing a particular shoot. Sometimes they can be small, 10 people, but other times they tend to be rather large. And so that's really when the logistics comes in of we're shooting in downtown Phoenix. I've got 6 semi-trucks. I got to park them in a building that has no parking for this type of vehicle, and I can't just use the loading bay. I've got to like take over an alley or a side street as well. So those are the larger projects, and then movies do come in occasionally. We don't have a film incentive in the state of Arizona, so we really don't see large pictures anymore. But just this past February, there was a Disney movie that had been in the works for a couple of years called Noelle that'll be coming out here, I believe, around Christmas time. Not too sure if it's in the theaters or in the new Disney app that'll be coming out on our smart TVs. But basically, the guy who wrote it, side story, I know I'm diverging here.
No, this is great.
Interesting. So the guy who wrote the movie, and the basic one-line sentence from my understanding of it, Santa Claus wishes to retire, wants his eldest son to do it. The eldest son doesn't want to do it. So then the daughter comes in, saves the day, or saves Christmas, if you will. So the guy who wrote it actually Googled and found Desert Ridge Mall up in North Phoenix, wrote the whole movie about the mall is the backdrop to the story. And when they came out here to scout, we found out that he had never even been to Arizona before in his life. He literally saw this online and constructed the whole script based upon photos. Unfortunately, because we don't have tax incentives here, they actually recreated and built Desert Ridge on a soundstage in Vancouver and shot the whole movie there, and then also had to do reshoots, and then they had to rebuild the stage, but then they went to Atlanta, which also has a really aggressive film incentive program, and shot the shots there. So when they were in Phoenix, they literally only came here for 2 days, and a lot of it was just drone work and exterior work, establishing shots that you see to let people know where you are, and it's got to have that Phoenix vibe to it. So without that incentive, we don't see a large major motion pictures, so that's why I tend to focus more on the commercials.
For those unfamiliar with the film industry, what would some of those incentives look like?
Yeah, so they're typically tax credits of some sort, whether a refundable credit, a refundable tax credit, or a transferable tax credit. Arizona actually had its film incentive from January 1st of 2006 until December 30th of 2010. It was a 5-year program, and it offered like up to a 30% transferable tax refund for the companies. But that went away, and what it does is it helps offset the cost to the production company. So, if you're going to spend $10 million on a movie and you can get back 25% of that, well, that means maybe you can hire the more expensive actor, maybe a bigger explosion if it's a kind of one of those action movies or things like that. So movie studios tend to go where the incentives are. So that's why New Mexico is really big. Netflix is taking over a lot of the studios over there. It's just announced that NBC Universal is taking over a facility because of their tax credit program and their incentives. Georgia is probably the biggest one right now, with the most projects going on outside of California. Also, New York is always going to be a big player in the market, but outside of those 2 major major media markets. Definitely, I would say Georgia and New Mexico are the two that are getting all these major movies.
So those incentives definitely play a large factor in where they determine where they're going to actually shoot everything.
Yeah, it's all about the math and the money nowadays. And, it's very hard to put $20 or $30 million out at risk on some independent movie that maybe never really seen anywhere. And, but Netflix is kind of changing that a little bit because they are able to do those artsy movies and put them out, and they do win Academy Awards. But that's why you see a lot of these Marvel movies that are going on, or DC Comics, a lot of rebranding of previous movies that have been done because they're safe bets. You're going to make your money back. And plus, you also have to realize, too, that when you make these movies, it's not just what you're going to make domestically that matters. It's what you're going to make overseas and internationally. So a DC or a Marvel Comics is going to be big in America. It's also going to be huge in the Asian market, the European market. So you know that even if it doesn't do well here, it can also do well there. So I believe that, there's been numbers of movies that just bombed in America. There were huge hits overseas. So even though it looked like the companies took a loss on making them, they actually were very profitable.
I'm sure you have a lot of really great stories because you've got to see a lot of different sets and worked with a lot of different producers and actors and actresses. Can you maybe share a couple of your favorite stories?
Well, a lot of them are Warner Brothers. There's people are very high strung in Hollywood and very demanding of things. I would probably say one of the most enjoyable times I had was we had to get a 20-foot inflatable baby for a particular scene. We were doing this dance number on stage, and the prop master couldn't find it, so we actually figured out that Babies R Us at the time would sometimes have those, like you see at car dealerships, like the big Gorillas or the big Uncle Sam's. So we tracked the one down in Los Angeles and had it on our set within 2 days. And I actually had to help the wardrobe lady out by making a diaper for it out of cloth. And so I've never made clothes in my life, not that I knew how, but trying to figure out the waist size of that huge inflatable baby, that was a lot of fun. Or the time I had a headless human being, and I had to go take it down somewhere to get some work done on it, and it had the blood and everything dripping off the neck. So I thought it'd be fun just to strap it in the front seat of my car, the seatbelt, and drive through it down the 101. But yeah, Hollywood's very interesting just because it's all illusions and it's all fake. And so just the other night with my kids, we were watching Casino 12 Ocean's 11, and the casino scenes. And I remember exactly the soundstage when they were shooting that, where they built it, and I could see in, and it just looked like the Bellagio. It was amazing what you can see. But it's very interesting to just see all the behind the scene things that go on in Hollywood.
How has the film industry changed over the last decade?
It's really changed a lot. I'd actually wouldn't say the decade. I'd say back since about 2000. And a lot of it really has to do with the incentives. That's when Canada, back in the 90s, started offering an incentive and what helped Canada out. Then in around 2000, that's when you had Bill Richardson, who was the governor of New Mexico at the time, planning a presidential bid. And also, say, Louisiana, they both took a look and said, well, let's offer some incentives as well. This is economic development. And simultaneously, you also had the unions in Los Angeles that were all going to go on strike because all the work was leaving Los Angeles and going to Canada. So it was, I saw a lot of bumper stickers that had the Canadian maple leaf with a red line through it saying "Got Work." I'm going to play on the Got Milk campaign at the time. And so I think there was a big movement to keep things in America. And of course, they're going to go where the incentives are. So that's really been the biggest change on the feature film side, is that it's now an incentivized industry, whereas it never was. But I would also take that back to say that even like the cameras that are shooting us right now, 10, 15 years ago, you didn't have this type of equipment. You had bigger equipment. You shot on film. And when you have film likes things really bright versus digital cameras like things a little bit darker. And so when you have to light things more, that means more people on set, a higher cost to do it. But now with the digital, you don't need all those people anymore because you don't have as much lighting that's needed. And so it really drops the cost down. So the number of jobs available tends to decrease as a result of the technology getting better. And also with all these different platforms, pretty much anybody can be a production company nowadays. You have all this distribution platforms, YouTube, you name it, especially with the web and social media, that you can create content and get it out there. So it went from just a couple of big companies that were out there to some medium-sized ones to now pretty much you can live in your dorm room and have a production company.
You had mentioned earlier about how you've worked closely with Arizona State University's film school. If you were going to talk to an individual that was just getting ready to graduate, how would you explain the process as far as how they would utilize the city of Phoenix and their services that they offer to enhance their productions?
That's a great question. A lot of the students, though, when they graduate, they need to latch onto another company. You really got to learn the ropes. This is an industry where I remember back when I was in Warner Brothers, I had mentioned that one of the DPs was a professor at USC. that I needed to go get a master's in film because I decided this is what I was going to do. And he said, don't waste your time. He said, I've got PhD students and masters and kids that are, with an undergrad, and they'd kill to get the writers their lunches like you are. So it's an industry that doesn't necessarily require a degree per se. In fact, I actually tell film students, go get an MBA and then do film at the same time, as maybe a minor or something, but get that other side of it. But for the students, how we can help them out is with their projects. Once they have insurance, which is kind of a stumbling block for a lot of them because it does cost money for that. But we can help them with where to go to get crew, where to go to get equipment, and also just alternatives to what's in their creative mind. Because a lot of times you'll find someone that has this new Quentin Tarantino-esque movie that they really want to shoot, and so it's just this huge, huge production. And you say, yeah, but you don't have the budget for that. So instead of doing that, let's do this. And so I try and help them really keep their costs down, especially if they are, let's say, a student. You don't want to waste all your money on doing a student film because it's never going to make any money. So instead, how do we do this as cheaply as possible? Teach you how to be creative and figure it out, and not totally put you into further debt than you already are.
Is there any other advice that you would offer to rising stars or anybody looking to further their careers in the film industry?
Definitely get out there and do it. This isn't like being a doctor where you have to have a degree in it. You don't have to have special certifications or anything per se. It's really just going out there and doing it. And a lot of it's personality based in this industry. When you're on set, in a typical office environment, you work 9 to 5, 8 hours a day. When you're on set, you can be working, 12, 13, 14 hours a day. Sometimes you don't start working until 10 p.m. at night and you end at 8 in the morning. And so as a result of that, you're stuck with this group of people for many days, really long hours. And if you're not fun to be around, people won't want to hire you. And so it doesn't matter that the person that has the bad personality has better skills than you. They prefer to have the personality on the set and then kind of deal with some of the issues, maybe, to help them along and teach them.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So as individuals are, looking to utilize you as a resource, I know the City of Phoenix in general just is a great resource for a lot of individuals. Mm-hmm. Are there any other websites, books, blogs, contacts that you would recommend people look into?
What I always recommend people when they're looking for a job is to go to a website for the Arizona Production Association, which is the nonprofit trade industry group for Arizona. Their website is azproduction.com. And there you'll find a listing of individuals that work in this industry as well as the equipment that's there. And they actually verify individuals to make sure they are who they say they are. So you don't have a college student that one day gets bumped up to a grip, which is a type of a position, and then starts marketing themselves as a grip because they really don't have that experience. So they actually vet you and make sure that you are legitimate. Plus you have to pay for it. So it's a more of a legitimate site. But I'd also say that that's the best way to go is to reach out to the production companies that are there and to talk with them about when their next gig is coming up, because this industry isn't like an industry that has a lot of employees per se per company. It's mostly freelance. And so when you get a project, you maybe have a small internal staff, but if it's a bigger thing, you're always looking for who's the grip, who's the electric, who's the set deck, and you're out hiring all of these people. So getting in with the production companies that are listed in the azproduction.com, I would say is probably the best way to get kind of started in the industry and to connect.
What are some factors or information that individuals from outside the state that they would be surprised to learn about what we have to offer in Arizona and the city of Phoenix? I would say it's our urban environment. That's probably the biggest thing. We're known for John Wayne movies, even though we don't do that here in Phoenix. But when people think of Arizona and Phoenix, they literally, if you look at any major sporting event that goes on and they always do the kind of the lead-ins with a shot, it's always like Papago Park or something with like a cactus in the background. And so that is the perception that is therefore portrayed across the rest of the country. So I think it's more of the dense urban environment that we have is really what is very unique to us. Just to give you an example, we had a Nissan commercial a couple years ago, and it was actually for the French and English market over in Europe. And the production company was out of Montreal, French speaking, and they picked Phoenix because they thought we looked like a European city, downtown Phoenix. And so we had roads closed, we had a bunch of things going on, but Europeans wouldn't necessarily think of Phoenix as this urban environment, but we double that a lot. And we also double downtown LA, we double a lot of big cities. So I think that urban environment, especially you really see it's really getting created here and in Tempe and in other places where you got big tall glass buildings, you feel like you're in a canyon all the time. That's something that people don't know that we have, but we definitely have that. No, that's great. When you're not working on set or working with different production companies, curious, how do you spend your free time here in the Arizona market?
Well, I have 2 kids, so that pretty much takes up all the time between baseball and swim. You have a place in Flagstaff, so I like to go up there. But generally just kind of just getting out and getting in the pool and just being an outdoor kind of, I guess, person more than anything else.
And I'm curious, have you been able to find a fulfilling career in the film industry in Arizona, or do you feel like for other individuals that you would need to move to another major market for it?
That's a very interesting question because I a lot of times when I go in and I talk to students, I say, raise your hand if you're going to move to, how many of you want to make movies? And mostly everybody does. And I say, how many of you want to move to Los Angeles? And pretty much everybody does. I know that we're always very concerned in Arizona and Phoenix about the brain drain, irregardless of the industry. We want to keep everybody here. But I also kind of have a feeling that, like, if you want to be a tech guru or you want to be a film guru, sometimes it's good just to go to San Francisco, or it's good to go to Los Angeles, get in there and see what it's actually like. And then your education there, your 2 years there is better than your 4 years I think you'll get in college. And you'll really have a great experience when you go there, because you'll realize this is really hard. I can actually do very well in Phoenix on my own. Now I'm a big fish in a little pond versus a little fish in a big pond when you get to the major market.
I'm curious, what's on your must-watch list as far as movies or TV shows?
So what's funny is I'm actually not much of a TV or a movie person. I prefer television over movies. I just find that with the family and everything, like, I just don't have the wherewithal or the time to sit down and really watch things. So I'm much more of a sports fan. So I'm constantly watching sports more than anything else. But definitely, I don't have regular television, don't have DirecTV, don't have cable, just simple, Roku is how I get it, and Netflix and Hulu. So pretty much things that are on Netflix, I tend to binge watch with my wife. Not binge watch, but we'll continually watch it until it's done. So I would probably say like Schitt's Creek, which is not how it's spelled, but spelled differently on the actual show. I found that to be probably the funniest TV show I've seen in about 20 years. I think it was just brilliantly written. Characters were well developed. It was a very simple concept, but and it's always really hard too, because coming from this industry and understanding how it works, when you make a pilot, you've got to get the entire audience to watch, to then go to the second episode and the third, but you have all these characters and you need to somehow, within a sitcom world, like 23, 24 minutes or 22 minutes, explain who every character is and then develop the story. And they did that within the first 5 minutes. And I don't know how they did it, but it was brilliant. And so that's why, to me, that particular show is probably my favorite one.
I absolutely agree. I actually do really enjoy that show myself. But how would you say that, Netflix or even like Amazon, or how are those other companies, how are they impacting, what the consumers are now seeing today?
They're offering a lot more variety because they can be much more niche in their focus on what they're making. When you're on broadcast television, you're broadcasting that half-hour time slot or hour time slot to the entire country. And so you have to have something that's generic enough that somebody in Dayton, Ohio, and Phoenix, Arizona can relate to. So that's why shows like ER, West Wing, those are things that we can all kind of understand. But when you get to like these Walking Deads and some of these other much more, really hyper-focused, or even Game of Thrones, you can really focus in on the audience and you can play towards that audience. You don't need to worry about the person in Dayton, Ohio anymore, because that's not your customer, it's somebody else. And so you can latch on with those people and they will keep coming back and keep watching your show. So I would say that's probably it. Yeah.
We've talked about like kind of how you've gotten to the point and where you are today, but as you're talking to other young individuals that are trying to become you or want to fill your shoes someday, what advice would you offer to them? What are the top tips or best practices?
Nowadays, number one, leave your phone number when you call. Don't just assume that my phone is going to pick it up. I get so many people that call me and hang up, and then when they get into a situation, they say, well, I called last week, and I'd say, well, you didn't leave me a voicemail. Or you left me a voicemail, but you didn't leave me your number. So that's one thing. Look up and talk to people. I would say, these are like just life skills, I would say, but I'm noticing it more with the kids coming out of college. And so when one that I do talk to is hitting those two major points, they're very legitimate and I love working with them. But aside from those kind of social soft skills that are out there, I would definitely encourage people to get another degree, because what you'll find is that this is an industry that a lot of people are in. And the example that I give to the students is it's kind of like getting into basketball and getting into film. Both of them have an extremely low entry point, cost of entry. In basketball, you need a pair of sneakers, which every kid has. Maybe you got to go buy a basketball, but you probably have one. And there's hoops in every park that's out here in the greater Phoenix area. So then you go in your little leagues, and then you advance up maybe into junior high or something. And now you start having to audition and try out for the teams, and they say, you're good, you're not good. And so all of a sudden you start to fall off, and then you go to high school, and even more kids are being told no. You get to college, they're really told no, and then it's the pros. The film industry, the challenge is that there's no one telling you, no, you're not any good, go find something else, because everybody, the cost of entry, has a cell phone, they have a computer, and they have YouTube, so they can post. They have their own distribution channel, but there's no real filter that's out there. So as a result of it, you have so many people going into this particular industry right now, and the jobs aren't always necessarily there. Or what I find more times than not, especially nowadays, is that none of these projects have any budgets. And so a lot of times you're working for like basically minimum wage, and it's not like it's a 40-hour a week minimum wage. It's like you work a day, and then you may not work for 3 or 4 days, and then you'll work for 10 hours or something, and then you'll be off for another 2 days. So the amount of people that are out there in this industry is growing every single day. Every college now has some sort of multimedia discipline. Every high school now has this. Well, not every, but a lot of them do. And so you're just seeing this a lot of people graduating with these film degrees of some sort, entering into the workforce. And reality is the studios only make so many movies. Netflix and HBO on them, they can, they've got a budget, but they can make a lot of content as well. But you're only making so many products out there, and so that becomes a challenge when you're trying to get a job in this industry.
So as a new graduate, I mean, should they expect that they're not going to be making very much their first job out of college?
I would expect the college graduates to I would advise them that you're not going to be making your movie that you've always wanted to do right out of college. And if you want to stay here in Phoenix, you need to get into commercials and start making your money in the commercial world, or even the still photography world, because these still photo shoots that we do are like really like when Adidas or Under Armour or Nike or Geico or whomever comes in, like their shoots are very expensive that they do. So do those type of projects. Bank, start saving, and then learn how to produce, learn how to go find funding. It's no different than a tech company. You've got an idea, you need to find money. So then you've got to go out and ask friends and family, try and find investors, and you got to make it. Then you got to, in the tech world, you got to sell it. In the film world, you have to sell it and have a distribution channel to get it out there. So understanding all of those things, but focusing on the commercials if you're out here. And that's why I say an MBA is a really good degree to have.
Maybe you could provide some insight if we have a local business here in Arizona that's interested in shooting a commercial. They've never done it before. Mm-hmm. How would you suggest that they go about that process?
Well, first of all, they'll need a production company. So there's a lot of them that are out there. So you can always go to azproduction.com, which is what I tell every producer to go to that calls me from out of state. And then talk with the idea with them, and you'll have to get a cost for it. And you can make it, and that's great, but also understand the distribution platforms that are out there. Like, Cox, they've got a way to get your product to market in the advertising world. So I would say in that particular area, it's more of it's more of talking to somebody that knows how to make these things, because anybody can get a camera, anybody can shoot anything, but really the crux of it, like I said before, the camera's not on very long. It's the writing, it's the story. If you don't have a good story, you have a horrible commercial. I mean, generally car ads, they're not really good. There's just some guy talking to you, but then there's other ads that are absolutely just brilliant, and they don't say very much, but the story behind it is so great that it sticks in your mind. So those are the type of things that I would, if you were a small business and you were looking to get in and get an advertisement of some sort, go that route. But and also don't discredit the social media side, and don't. And by that I mean don't think of an influencer using your product. What we're starting to see now is a lot more commercials that are being made specifically for social media. So they're not meant to be broadcast on any of the major channels. They're meant strictly for social media. And those, irregardless if it's a commercial, you've still got the same crew size. So when you're doing something in social media world, don't think that it's a cheap, easy thing, because cheap, easy doesn't sell. Make sure that you've got a good production company behind you and a good story, and shoot it and then get it out in that manner.
Would you mind maybe just sharing a couple of different names of production companies that are here in Arizona?
Sure. I mean, there's True Story Films. There's Randy Murray Productions. I'm
sure there's several, but just to give people a couple ideas.
Yeah, View West. Daily Planet. I mean, there's a lot of them that are out there, and they're all very good. They're all very seasoned, and they've been doing this for years. I mean, I've been working with most of them for 13 years now. Some of them, they just started when I started, and now they're flying all over the world doing commercials.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So another thing for those listeners, I mean, we have a very diverse group of listeners. For those individuals that are not familiar with the film industry, that just are curious and wanted to know more, I'm sure several of them would like to know, who are some of the biggest stars that you've gotten to work with or been on site with?
So I actually don't work with the stars very often. I know that is a question that I get a lot. The reality is that I work with the location managers, which are the ones that pick out the locations, and or the producers. Those are my main contacts that are out there. Out here locally, whenever there's a big star, there's a movie, I tend not to be there. And it's just because when I'm on set, then people start asking questions of, oh, can we close that? Can we do that? And it's like, we already have a plan. Let's just stick to the plan. But when I was in Hollywood, some of the big stars like John Goodman, I worked on Center of the Universe with. I always loved Oded Fehr, he was on The Mummy, which was the movie, but I worked with him on Presidio Med, and he was just a very down-to-earth person. Brooke Shields, obviously, from Suddenly Susan. And then the other one that I always thought was very funny was my last show I did was this TV show for ABC, I believe, called Hot Properties, about 4 female real estate agents in New York City. And we had this one woman on there, and her name was Sofia Vergara. And none of us knew who she was. She was like, we knew she was new to the U.S. market, but she was kind of big in the Latin American market. And I just remember whenever the Television or Univision film crew would come to do a live feed onto their set of their news, they would get there and they'd have no idea. They were just told to go to Warner Brothers and show up at stage 10, and they get on there, and all of a sudden they'd be like, oh, it's Sophia, I can't believe this. And we were all like, who is this woman? We have no idea. And now she's turned into someone very big.
Phil, I wanted to thank you again for taking the time to join us and to share a little bit more about the Arizona film industry.
Absolutely, anytime.